Democrats Abroad Global Women's Caucus today for hopefully it should be a wonderful event. We are talking about the ERA and the last 3 states and now the courts with our guest tonight, Sally. Oh, let me just let everybody know that if you have a question, please, since everyone can speak during this, if you have a question, type * hand up in the chat. I'm just going to type it really quick. And if you are watching on Facebook, then we have somebody watching the Facebook Live. Just write your question in the comments and we'll pick it up and ask our guest for you. So with that, Sally.
Okay, thank you.
Take it
away. Today we are really lucky, or this evening, depending upon where you are, because we have the most extraordinary women who are going to tell us all about their experiences with the Equal Rights Amendment. First of all, we have the co-founders, and I'm going to introduce them to you. There's Kamala Lopez, who has been the founder and the co-director of Equal Means Equal. And for those who don't know what that is, it's an association which is dedicated to getting the ERA into our Constitution. And if that would happen, and it should happen, and it should have already happened, it would be the 28th Amendment. She is an award-winning filmmaker, actress, and activist, born in New York City to an Indian mother and a Venezuelan American father, graduate of Yale in philosophy and theater. And she started as a child actress on PBS's Sesame Street, one of our favorite shows. She has been the recipient of multiple awards, both from federal and state government, as well as private sector. The Woman of Courage Award from the National Women's Political Caucus, the Latino Spirit Award from the state of California, an Impact Award for Excellence, and she was named one of the 21 leaders for the 21st century. And today she's going to tell us in a minute all about why she founded Equal Means Equal and what that association is doing for all of us. Her co-founder, Natalie White, who's co-director, is a provocative and progressive feminist, as well as an artist. And just to show you how progressive and feminist she is, she led a 250-mile march from New York City to DC to raise awareness for the Equal Rights Amendment. The day after the march, she painted ERA Now on the US Capitol steps, yay, in broad daylight in 20-foot letters. I told you she's an artist. She was arrested a week later. She pled not guilty and represented herself. I don't know if you didn't know Wendy yet, I guess. That took place 2 days before inauguration and 3 days before the first Women's March in DC. And she made her trial into a media circus, appearing on MSNBC, Forbes, The Washington Post, and Vice, just to name a few. In January of 2017, White became the co-director of Equal Means Equal, and together, White and Lopez, that's what their bios say, successfully achieved the ratification of the last 3 states that we needed in this order, Nevada, Illinois, and Virginia, after no state had even voted on the ERA in almost 40 years, bringing the ERA to the 38th state needed to ratify the amendment. Our next speaker, Wendy Murphy, who I've had the luck and honor to have a number of conversations with, is Equal Means Equal's legal counsel. And she is an impact litigator. I'll let her tell you what that means, but in my own words, that means she finds the lawsuits that are going to make a difference in our lives on a daily basis. And she specializes in women's and children's constitutional and civil rights. She is the director of the Women's and Children's Advocacy Project under the Center for Law and Social Responsibility at the New England School of Law in Boston. And she has been teaching sexual violence law, unfortunately that does exist, for 20 years. Wendy has won a zillion landmark cases and has filed countless suits in state and federal court to improve legal protections for women and children. She's a former child abuse and sex crimes prosecutor and served as a visiting scholar at Harvard Law School, where her work is focused on the status of women and their victimization under our US criminal justice system. Now, we've decided before we had the pleasure of seeing all your names up there that Wendy is going to speak first, because we all agreed that it would be good to give the background to the legal situation of the Equal Rights Amendment, which will explain then how Kamala and Natalie got involved in and started Equal Means Equal. So Wendy, I'm going to go on mute and you can take it away. If you have questions, again, type them into the chat box. If you don't know where your chat box is, by the way, it's at the bottom of the screen you're probably looking at. It says chat box, so just click on that. And please mute your microphones if you're not speaking, so we don't get any feedback from unwanted noise. Thank you for listening. And Wendy, it's all yours. Go ahead. 10 minutes.
Thank you so much, Sally and Angela, and thanks to Democrats Abroad for hosting this. It's always so important to come together, especially over important issues like the Equal Rights Amendment. And thankfully for technology today, we can do that even across all the borders that exist in our lives, geographically and otherwise. So I want to start by saying that the Equal Rights Amendment is hardly a new issue. It dates back, in my view, to 1868, in the sense that that was when our 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution was adopted. And when it was adopted, it promised some pretty essential human and civil and constitutional rights to persons in America, the most significant of which were due process of law and equal protection of law. There are other aspects, but those are the ones that matter the most with regard to the ERA. The reason that matters in terms of women's equality today is that women were intentionally left out of the 14th Amendment in 1868. And we have been fighting for basic equality ever since. By excluding women as a class of people from equal protection of law under the 14th Amendment, basically our own government was declaring that women ought not to be protected on par with all other persons in our country. It was a declaration of second-class citizenship. It was an explicit declaration of discrimination by the state. And it was an official embracing, if you will, of the idea of women as second-class persons. To say that made women angry would be an understatement. So it was pretty immediate that women started fighting back, and let's just say strategically thinking about how to insert themselves into the 14th Amendment. Simultaneously with the 14th Amendment, we also adopted the 15th Amendment, which gave the right to vote to only Black men. White men already had the right to vote, but the 15th Amendment then extended that right to Black men, and again, intentionally excluded all women. So the 14th and 15th together really presented a moment in history when women became enslaved, if you will, by their own government. We moved pretty quickly to fight back against that. And as we all know, because this is our anniversary, our 100th anniversary of the right to vote, suffrage became part of our Constitution in 1920, but it took from 1868 to, or 1869, I think was the 15th, but it took all those years until 1920 before women even got the right to vote. And they were forced, in a sense, to fight for these rights as separate things because the 14th and 15th were separate. So we started fighting for the right to vote and simultaneously fighting for equality. And there were lots of suffragists who said, the right to vote isn't good enough. We can vote all day long, but we don't count very much so long as we remain second-class citizens under the Constitution. And nonetheless, we did not win that basic equality ever. I mean, we still have not won that repair work, if you will, on the 14th Amendment. Even today, we sit here in that second-class status. But the beginning of the attempt to repair the 14th Amendment goes back to the early 1900s when Alice Paul wrote the Equal Rights Amendment. Some language in it changed. And I think it was in the 1940s that the language became what it is today. And it's very simple language. Equality of rights shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. That's it. It's a simple, very obvious what it does, but very simple law that ought not to be controversial, and many people think is not controversial, unless, of course, you're a white man and you support the patriarchy and all of the power that that brings you. Then, of course, you support women's inequality. But I guess what I'm saying is that today it's a lot more difficult to come up with a legitimate reason to support women's inequality. Many years ago, there were arguments made about why women didn't need equality, and there were even strong equality. I think we've reached a stage where that argument doesn't carry water anymore. So that's the good news. So after Alice Paul wrote the Equal Rights Amendment, and after it became proposed to Congress, it didn't go far, and it didn't really bubble up, if you will, to politically meaningful at the congressional level anyway, until the civil rights era in the 1960s. Women started fighting along with African Americans and Blacks in America who were equally struggling with regard to basic rights in terms of education and healthcare and due process and all the things we take for granted, when I should say that white men take for granted. So women started fighting in the 60s and mustered up enough power to finally get the ERA through Congress in 1972. That really was the product, I think, in terms of what women got out of the civil rights era. We got two things in 1972. We got Congress to pass the Equal Rights Amendment, and we got Congress to pass Title IX of the Education Amendments. Title IX, as some of you may know, is a civil rights law that gave women equality and protection against discrimination, but only in education, not in any other aspect of society, just education. And when Congress passed Title IX, it did so pretty much coincidentally with its passage of the Equal Rights Amendment. So in a sense, what Congress was saying was, we're giving women equality in education while we wait around for the states to ratify this constitutional amendment, which will give them equality in all other areas of life. So we were very happy, obviously, with Title IX in 1972 because education was so important and women did not have equal access to education or equal treatment once they got there. So it was really good to have Title IX in place. And of course, we were hopeful that once Congress passed the Equal Rights Amendment and sent it to the states for ratification, that we would soon have equality everywhere. I want to just clarify one point, because I know this isn't the way the law works in other countries. The way to change the Constitution in America is to follow the rules that are set forth in Article 5. And Article 5 is very clear and very simple. It says that Congress shall propose amendments. In this case, Congress proposed the ERA, and then it shall be sent to the states for ratification by 3/4 of the states. Once 3/4 of the states agree that the amendment should become part of our Constitution, then the Constitution changes. So in 1972, the ERA didn't become law, it just became proposed by the Congress, and it was sent to the states for ratification. Pretty quickly thereafter, many states ratified. I think, I'm not sure of the number off the top of my head, but almost all states in the North very quickly ratified. And it looked like we were going to have an amendment to the Constitution fairly quickly. But, and I should mention that when Congress passed the Equal Rights Amendment and sent it to the states, they imposed a 7-year deadline on ratification, basically saying to the states, if you don't get this done in the next 7 years, this amendment will never become law. You might have to start over, but this particular amendment will never become law. And as we came toward the end of that 7-year period in 1978, the 7-year period would have ended in 79. But as we got toward the end of that period, we were 3 states shy of the 38 we needed to reach that 3/4 number and make the ERA part of the Constitution. So advocates went back to Congress and said, we need you to extend the deadline. And there were debates about how much more time we needed, but ultimately Congress did extend the deadline 3 more years to June of 1982. So basically we got a 10-year window from 72 to 82. We got 10 years of time to ratify in 38 states, and we never got there. We never got more than 35. So the 35 we had in 78 never reached, we never got any more ratifications between 78 or 79 and 82. We were stuck at 35. One important thing I want to tell people about that era is that people wonder why it is that we didn't reach 38. Like, what happened to put the brakes on? We were moving with such great momentum. What happened that put the brakes on? And I think the answer is several different things, but most significant to me as an attorney is that the Supreme Court, it's not Phyllis Schlafly, which many of you may have heard, she likes to take credit. People from her organization like to take credit. This was an anti-equality activist woman who ran around the country saying women didn't need equality. It would be bad for them, bad for families, and so forth. It really wasn't Phyllis Schlafly. I think she was propagandized and propped up as the justification or excuse for why we didn't get the last 3 states. But the reality is the United States Supreme Court issued a decision in 1973 giving women equality, basically filling that gap under the 14th Amendment that I mentioned at the outset. They said that women should be treated fully equally, on par with all other protected class categories, subject to strict scrutiny, which is the highest level of legal protection you can have. And in a sense, because they did that, it was a declaration to the states that they didn't have to pass the ERA. It was no longer necessary because the courts had fixed the 14th Amendment. That took the air out of our momentum, and it gave the states that were on the fence about ratifying a reason to say, well, we're not going to ratify because you don't really need it. The Supreme Court has stepped in to help you. Problem, the Supreme Court's decision, that was Frontiero versus Richardson, 1973, the Supreme Court's decision, which took the air out of our momentum, was only a plurality decision, which is to say it wasn't a binding precedential ruling by a majority of the court. So it was a bit fragile. Nonetheless, it gave the states an excuse to say, oh no, of course the court's not going to reverse itself because it would never have said you're fully equal if you weren't really equal. Well, guess what happened? After we stopped getting states to ratify, and I think we only got 1 more after 1973, the court reversed itself in Craig versus Boren in 1976, took away that fully equal protection that they gave us in 73 and bumped women down under the legal standards of protection. The court bumped us down to lesser legal protections, what's called intermediate scrutiny, and that's where we remain today. So we failed as of 1982. We did not get to 38 states. And women, a lot of women gave up, not everybody, but a lot of women gave up and felt like we had no choice but to start over. Then something very important happened. 2 important things happened. One, in 1992, the Congress approved an amendment, now known as the 27th Amendment. It approved that amendment as valid. It had been proposed by Congress in 1789, which meant that amendment got 203 years to ratify. Remember, we got 10, they got 203. Women were not happy. And that amendment pertained to congressional pay raises. So the notion that protecting congressional pay raises with a constitutional amendment was somehow more important, that it got 203 years to ratify, and women's basic equality, which is really an important constitutional issue, got only 10 years. That made women angry, and they started to mobilize, and they started to churn and become angry, and said, we're going to fight back. We're not going to start over, because if they get 203 years, we should get at least 50, or whatever the number was by then. They started fighting back and said, we're going to go for those last 3 states. We're not starting over. And the other thing that happened was in 2012. In 2012, our Obama appointee archivist of the United States, which his name is David Ferrero, he issued a letter saying that if we got to 38 states, he would publish the ERA. And that's an important thing for the archivist to do. In case you don't know what the archivist does, he's sort of the librarian of all laws in this country, all laws, regulations, and so forth. His job is to, once some law gets made, however it gets made, whether because Congress passes one or some agency creates a new regulation, it's his job to literally physically put it in the books. So he promised in 2012 that if we got to 38 states, if we won those last 3 states, he would publish the ERA, put it in the books, and we would be equal. That letter spurned a lot of activism and was followed by, which Cam's going to take up now in the next moments. It was followed by very sincere efforts in 3 different states, first Nevada, then Illinois, and then Virginia, relying on that archivist promise. They went forward and ratified the ERA in their states, which made Nevada become the 36th state, Illinois became the 37th state, and Virginia became the 38th state in January of this year. So what did we expect would happen after Virginia ratified? The archivist would go to the law books, publish the Equal Rights Amendment, and boom, do exactly what he said he would do in 2012, but he didn't do that. He didn't do that. He refused to publish the ERA, which led us as an organization, Equal Means Equal, and another organization and some women here in federal court in Massachusetts, we filed a lawsuit against the archivist, basically saying you were obligated to publish the ERA because we reached 38 states and that's your job and it's a mandatory job. You don't have discretion not to publish. You violated the law and we're suing you to make sure you perform that function of publication, not only because you promised you would, but because that's the law, that's your job. You had to do it and you didn't. That's illegal. We sued him. Our lawsuit is still pending. I'll talk a little bit more about its status after Cam and Natalie have a chance to speak. But I just wanted to give you that lay of the land to sort of give you the basics about why we're here, where it all began, and how important it is that we continue the fight.
That's great, Wendy. Thank you. Yeah, I think we'll come back to the lawsuit in Massachusetts and the one in DC, because I think it would be great if you could give us an update of how you see those 2 lawsuits progressing. But let's hear from Cam, as you say. Kamala?
Yes, hi. Can you hear me? Okay, so I, like 96% of Americans, grew up thinking that men and women were equal. I had 0 clue that we didn't have equal rights, and I led my life as if I was completely equal. I found out in 2009 when I was screening my film, A Single Woman, which was about first U.S. Congresswoman Jeanette Rankin, who got herself elected before women had the vote by getting 80,000 men to vote for her. I was showing that movie at the Smithsonian, and there was an actress there that had been hired, and she was dressed up in suffrage gear, and she was wandering around talking to people, and she came up to me and she said, "I'm Alice Paul, and I'm back to haunt you because you've done nothing to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment." And I was so shocked. I was like, wait a minute, what? Like, I was like, I had like my mind broke, and I was like, that's not possible. That's not right. What does that mean? Like, that's like we've been gaslit as a whole group of people to think that we're equal, and then go out there in the world and fall short, and then think it's us. It's so smart though. It's so smart because we think we're less than because we're not playing on an even field. So we work even harder. We have less time. I mean, it's just so genius. And as a Latina, I'm making 44 cents on the white male dollar every hour. So how many trillions of dollars every hour are they stealing from us? I got so upset about this. And also coming from entertainment and media, I thought, we can fix this, man. We've got social now. We've got it all. This should take no time. And so I started to talk about, let's just get it done. Let's do like funny videos. I had this idea of, because I had worked for the Writers Guild strike. And during the strike, we had gone around and did little videos with famous people. Sean Penn, everybody did them. And the point was, actors can't act without scripts. So if you want to not pay writers, then you're going to have a bunch of dummies, because we don't make the stuff up. You know, you have to tell us. Anyway, it worked really well. And I said, why don't we do that for women? Like, explain that we're not equal. I couldn't get anybody interested in Hollywood at all. And this was the beginning of what I realized is nobody wants this to happen, guys. Like, it's too weird that it hasn't happened. We're 47% of the paid workforce. 75% of our kids have working moms. 1 in 5 of them are going to bed hungry. This is the biggest single solution to this puzzle, and nobody knows about it. That tells you what we're up against. That tells you why it's taken me from 2009 to even be able to have this conversation on this level, because people weren't there. They didn't get it. It's cognitive dissonance. When you're being told you can be, do, and have everything, you're empowered. That empowerment narrative is the most dangerous thing for young girls. Anyway, so when I stepped into this, I thought education, education, education. And so started going to high schools, to colleges, started researching. I researched 26 different areas in our society where women are somehow being discriminated against. And I looked at it and saw whether, if we had equal rights in the Constitution, would it help? And it was frightening that it would help in every single area. From the violence, where the police have discretion to not, if you have a restraining order, you might as well wipe your ass with it, because it means zero when you come down to it. The police do not have to show up, because they're not compelled by equal protection of the law, as Wendy was saying. So this is like, became to me the single most important thing we can do. If we care about women all over the world, and I say this to Democrats abroad in particular, because a lot of very well-meaning American women are focused on the horrific situation of the pandemic of oppression and violence worldwide, which is just, I mean, honestly, beyond the pale. However, from working with the United Nations, from looking at CEDAW, which is the international treaty that bans discrimination against women. The United States is one of only 7 countries that has not signed that treaty. Why? It would grandfather in the Equal Rights Amendment, and they don't want to pay us. They don't want to pay us. They don't want to deal with the violence. They don't want to deal with it. And it's killing women all over the world. Millions of women are suffering because we can't get our heads out of our asses enough to give ourselves basic equal rights. And for me, the buck stops here. We cannot do anything till we finish this, because everything else is bullshit. It's smoke and mirrors. It's building your skyscrapers on quicksand, and it will fall down. Ask any woman that ended up in the Supreme Court, like Jessica Lanahan, whose 3 children were shot in the head by her husband when she had a restraining order, and she called the Colorado police 9 times and went over there twice, and they still did nothing, and they had all day to do it. Let me tell you, this is the fight of our lives. It's happening now, and nobody knows about it, and few people give a shit. So we've got to get some urgency here, and we don't have very long. Our case was heard. Wendy did a brilliant job, and yet the judge, who was an Obama appointee, African-American woman, still dismissed our case on standing, saying that we as women have no right to be involved in this conversation. Something in the milk ain't white. Something stinks to high heaven. Something is wrong. And we can't let it go on. When I started, there were 3.5 women getting killed every day from intimate partner violence. Today, it's 4.2. How many are we going to wait till it gets to 10? What are we doing? Come on. So, you know, that's where I'm at. And I met Natalie, and Natalie was just all about it. You know, put your life on the line, put it on the line, because women are dying every day. And this is the first step. So I joined with Natalie, and we've been busting our asses. We got these 3 states. Now they're going to come and tell us that's not good enough. It's just always another lie about why we can't have equal rights, and we cannot let it go on. That's it.
Yeah, Kamala, I totally understand how you feel. We've all been led down a garden path about what our rights are as women, and it's never going to happen until we have it in the Constitution. So with that, I would recommend that if you have not requested your absentee ballot for this election and you're an overseas voter, please go to votefromabroad.org. If someone is watching this on live and they're in the United States, please go to iwillvote.com and verify that you're registered to vote or registered to vote. It's very important. There's so many things that we can't do just because of the people who are in power. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Natalie. Sorry to interrupt you.
Hi, it's okay. And I'm sorry I got kicked off for 1 minute and didn't get to hear the end of Kamala's speech, but I'm seeing all of the messages come up. And, Kamala and I met in the summer of 2016. I had heard about this woman who had, spent years to make a documentary about the Equal Rights Amendment. And at that point, a year before that, in 2015, I'm an artist. So I was doing a performance art piece in a plexiglass box on the Bowery in New York. And it was, my gallery had called me up and they said, we have an opening in 2 weeks at the gallery. If you would like to, my last name is Natalie White. I just saw that comment come up. So my gallery had called and said, we have an opening at our gallery in 2 weeks if you have something ready to go. And of course I didn't, but I can do performance art. So I decided to do performance art. My performance art was that I sat in a plexiglass box for 7 hours a day, 5 days a week, on top of an American flag. And I said it was about the lack of movement within the women's movement in America. And I didn't know why the women's movement wasn't moving. I could just feel it. At that point, I knew I was a feminist, but I didn't know anything about the Equal Rights Amendment. So during the opening for that show, a friend of mine came up to me and they said, well, the reason why the women's movement isn't moving is because women don't have equal rights in the United States Constitution. And I got so angry. And I was mostly angry because no one had told me. And I felt like that was my real calling in life. After I had went around and I asked all of my friends, some who were Harvard educated, had been to Ivy League schools. I asked them, did you know that women didn't have equal rights in the United States Constitution? And no one knew. And so that's when I said, well, I have to do something about this. And, you know, I feel like as an artist, it's my moral obligation to reflect society. And so that's what I started doing. And it was in that plexiglass box that I came up with Natalie White for Equal Rights, which was a show that I did a year later at the White Box Foundation in New York. And following the show, I did a 16-day, 250-mile march from New York to DC. But right before the show started and the walk started, I met Kamala. And that's when we came together and we found out that, you know, there was someone else out there in the world that was just as passionate about the ERA as we were. So it was really good to find someone else out there in the world who had the same motivation and passion that I did. And, you know, following my 16-day, 250-mile march, I painted ERA Now on the Capitol property. I got arrested a week later, and the government decided to come after me. And so that's when I studied how to be a lawyer and represented myself in court. Again, I hadn't met Wendy yet, so. But you know, they had set my trial date for, you know, 2 days before the presidential inauguration and 3 days before the Women's March, which, you know, they had set my trial date back in September. So at that point, we didn't know that Hillary Clinton was going to be the nominee for president. And we sure as heck did not know that Donald Trump was going to be the president. So after that, you know, I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time. Kamala came down and stayed with me. And, you know, we had a big group of other activists who were there with us. Lizzie Jagger was there. Sarah Beth Stroller was there. Patricia Arquette came and was one of my character witnesses, along with Lizzie and Kamala. And that's when, you know, at least for myself, I know that Kamala had been working on this for years and, you know, had been very involved, but at least for myself, that's when I really could see everything forming in a way that we came up with a path to the finish line on the ERA. And we, you know, came up with how we were going to do it. And we, you know, kind of surgically dissected the states, the people that we needed to vote on this, and how we were going to get them to vote on this. So, you know, I kept on running into people who would say things, you know, like, well, isn't there somebody else out there doing it? Isn't there a group of constitutional lawyers doing this already? Aren't there organizations that have millions of dollars that are already out there doing this? And the answer to that was no. There was not. There was no $1 million organizations giving money to the Equal Rights Amendment. And I think that it's really a testament to the sheer force of volunteers that we were able to put together, that we were able to get this over the finish line, because I don't think that we spent more than $40,000 in Illinois. It was just about, you know, getting the people involved and, you know, casting a larger shadow than what we had the wherewithal to do. And that was really a testament to that. And, you know, the sheer force that we went into Illinois with and went into Virginia with, and we kept going back to Virginia. And when Virginia kept saying no, you know, that's when we, you know, brought in the political activism that I'm, you know, really excited about, which, you know, we staged a die-in in front of Speaker Cox's office, of the Speaker of the House in Virginia's office. And, you know, I got arrested along with Rachel Ramon Donnellan, and we, you know, had to be physically dragged out of the out of right in front of the Speaker of the House's office. We went back the next day. You know, Sister Leona was topless, you know, reenacting the Virginia state seal of the goddess of virtue overthrowing the tyrannical king. And, you know, I played the tyrannical king. I was not the topless one there. And, you know, the next day we went back and we staged a mock wedding ceremony between the family foundation, who was trying to kill the ERA in Virginia, and the Speaker of the House. And all of this got got every single day we were on the front page of the news. And it was all about the Equal Rights Amendment. And it was all about how we were motivating people to unseat this do nothing for women Republican majority in the House in Virginia. And after that, Kamala and I, we said, we can't have this happen anymore. We need to move to Virginia and unseat these people. So we got an Airbnb. We moved there for 3 months. And every single day for 3 months, we moved to Suffolk, which had a Republican named Chris Jones, who had that seat, who was the 21-year Republican incumbent. And he was also the architect of the racially gerrymandered maps. And there was really no hope in getting this guy unseated, except that we lived there and we were out there every day, flyering every day, getting people involved every day. We even, pushed our cart around Walmart, like next to big crowds of people talking about Chris Jones and how awful he was. We worked the polls. We signed up people to vote. We went into places that most people would never want to set foot in, knocked on people's doors and registered them to vote for the first time and provided them with transportation from where they live to their voting booths. And we weren't going to stop until we really had the people elected that we needed to vote. And we went after 10 seats, the most likely 10 seats that we're able to flip from an anti-ERA vote to a pro-ERA vote, which, it just so happened that all of the anti-ERA people had to be, Republicans. And so we were really hoping to flip 2 of the seats while we were focusing on 10, but we ended up flipping 6 seats. Yay. So we were hoping for 2 and we got 6. And that's, we used some pretty harsh tactics, but that's what you have to do when it's an election year. And I'm very proud of the work that we did. And, we also had an ice cream truck, driving around in an ice cream truck, handing out free ice cream, telling people to vote for equality. So that's, those are kind of the things that we did that were helpful to get the votes we needed.
That's fabulous, Natalie. I'm thinking, I love these war stories. Let me ask both Kamala, you and Wendy, what's next for Equal Means Equal? And do share other stories with us if you'd like to, but where do we go from here? I know Wendy wants to tell us, or at least I want her to share with us where we are in the courts. And so maybe she can do that first, but I'd love to hear from Natalie and Kamala on where do you see Equal Means Equal going from a strategic point of view, or from an activist point of view, running corollary, I would say, with the legal moves that Wendy is taking care of. So I don't know which one of you wants to.
Well, if I could just say one quick thing, because I'm not just a lawyer, I'm as rabble-rouser as they come, and I have done, which is why I'm so happy and proud and bonded with EME for all the right reasons. Lawyers don't just go to court and file papers. We sometimes do direct impact litigation in the form of file papers plus protest. And we have to do it a little bit more creatively because you can lose your license. But I do think that there's a place here for the restructuring of what we think of as activism for women as a class, in the sense that just like we have the ACLU, whose sole purpose is to go to court, and they're in every state, whose sole purpose is to go to court for strategic reasons, filing particular cases where the goal is to advance rights for whatever the class of people is that they're representing. We don't have that for women. We don't have a group like that in the United States. And I think no matter what happens with the ERA, although we'll never stop working on it, I do see EME as an important organization for continuing to do that in the courts on all sorts of issues. And we've already talked about other cases we could file that don't necessarily relate directly to the ERA, but that would advance the agenda and help to keep the pressure up. We need an ACLU-like organization for women, because the ACLU doesn't really represent women's interests well at all, especially on issues involving violence against women, which is my specialty. I've been filing impact litigation cases in the courts for 30 years. And, I not long ago represented a rape crisis center that was being forced to turn over records without any justification whatsoever, and they were being fined $500 a day for not complying. And you know, I'm in court saying, listen, if this was the New York Times objecting to your unlawful subpoena, would you punish the New York Times with a $500 a day fine, or you know, whatever the punishment would be, or would you respect their objection and allow them an opportunity to appeal? And we were getting such poor treatment, the kind of treatment that wouldn't be imposed on any other type of group. And $500 a day as a fine puts the Rape Crisis Center out of business. They didn't have $500 a month to spare. So I got 500 women from across the country to each sign a document agreeing to spend 1 day in jail in lieu of the fine. I mean, it was really symbolic because you can't do that. But it was what I stapled a big protest paper, you know, with all these signatures on it, to make my point to the court that it wasn't just about disrespecting women's rights. It was about denying them due process and the right to challenge an unlawful court order by imposing a fine that the judge knew we couldn't afford, just to silence us and protect and prevent us from challenging what was obviously an illegal court order. So it was my way of incorporating activism into the court system and kind of protesting in my legal pleadings. I mention that only because I see Equal Means Equal as an organization that's going to bridge the gap between what Natalie does and what Cam does, and the you know, direct action stuff, and the more sophisticated stuff that we need to be doing in the courts, not only to change the law, but to give visibility. And I want to emphasize this point of visibility, because I am up to here with people saying, I didn't know. Kamala, I didn't know I didn't have equal rights. Natalie, I didn't know I didn't have equal rights. I've been teaching for over 20 years. My students have never heard of the ERA. I've been an activist, impact litigator, academic type. I write scholarship all the time. I finished law school not knowing about the ERA. I was raised in the time of Title IX and misled by propaganda to believe Title IX was a sports equity law rather than a civil rights law. That is unacceptable. So to me, the invisibility problem is very significant, and the importance of reframing things is really critical for us. So not just increasing understanding of rights. You cannot enforce your rights if you don't know what they are, and you cannot have any hope of fighting for equality if you don't know you're not equal. So it's both an awareness issue and a visibility issue, in the sense that every single child in America should be told that they have a constitution that does not protect women as equal citizens. That should start with kindergarten. You should learn it every year. And then when you get to law school, you might learn about it and also learn how to fix it. But that does not happen right now. There is zero curriculum on this issue, period. There is zero curriculum on Title IX and civil rights for women. So to me, this is a visibility issue that unfortunately has perpetuated because we've functioned as activists in our different disciplines and in silos. And now it's time to come together and in my view, take a lesson from Black Lives Matter. Take a lesson from other activist organizations and act unapologetically the way they have when they come together and unite. Women have never united well around the issues that matter most to us. To me, violence against women is the moral imperative. If you have high rates of violence against women, that is the measuring stick.
Wendy, sorry to interrupt, but we all agree with everything you're saying, and it's great, but can you just share with the people that have called and are watching us, what's going on with the suit that Equal Means Equal and other plaintiffs have filed that you are absolutely in charge of? Can you tell, because it's in Massachusetts, it's gone through a first set of hearings. What's going on with that, and what do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, I've always told Kamala and Natalie and anybody that would listen about this legal strategy that we have a very slim chance of winning, and that's simply because courts are political, and there is no political will to give women equality in this country. There just isn't. And so we have to understand that courts are political, and just going to court and being correct doesn't mean you win. So we filed our lawsuit knowing full well that it would be a very big legal, but more than that, political fight for us, and expecting that the court would dismiss us on standing. As I told Kamala in the beginning, if we lose on standing, it's sort of good for us because it gives us much faster pathway to the appellate court. If we had not been dismissed on standing, we'd still be in the court where you can't make much effective change. So we lost on standing, which is sort of silly because, as the judge said during our hearing on the government's motion to dismiss, if this group and women as a class don't have standing, who does? It's a really important question. Certainly, we believe that women as a class ought to have standing anytime the rights of women as a class are at stake and the government is denying them unlawfully. So we are appealing. And here's the answer to the question, where are we now? We are filing dual appeals, in a sense, both at the same time. We have a direct appeal to the First Circuit being filed. We've already docketed it. And we're filing a cert petition with the United States Supreme Court. It's a little bit unusual to file a cert petition directly from the trial court, from the district court. But it's doable, it's legal, it's procedurally correct. And I think we're going to get an answer to the question fairly quickly. Is the United States Supreme Court interested in addressing this issue? If they are, they'll take our case. And if they're not, they won't. There is a parallel case pending in Virginia. It was filed by attorneys general from the last 3 states that ratified, Nevada, Illinois, and Virginia. The attorneys general filed suit there against the same defendant, the archivist who refused to publish the ERA unlawfully. Our view is that it's fine for them to file suit, it's great, but they don't speak for women as a class. The government does not have authority to speak for or advocate for the interests of women as a class. They can't. It's not that they don't want to, they can't legally. So we both have cases pending that are complementary in a sense. We got the government arguing for women on one side and women arguing for women on the other. And their case will not likely be resolved before the election. I suspect it will be used prior to the election to explain how important it is to women that you vote for certain types of candidates, and I agree with that. But I suspect they will lose as well. The real question is, will the United States Supreme Court take up either or both of our cases and answer the question? If they do, it doesn't seem like we have the right kind of Supreme Court to do the right thing on this issue. We have a very conservative Supreme Court. However, having said that, I'm going to emphasize what I keep saying about unity. If women can come together, if we can unite, if we can be very single-minded and use our force as an enormously huge class of people, use our force to put pressure on the United States Supreme Court to do the right thing, it's possible that if they take the case, we could win. That's my view.
Thanks, Wendy. And just so you all know, Democrats abroad joined what we call a Friends of the Court brief. So there were over 200 associations and people and organizations that signed a really great brief. And so we can stand up tall, Democrats abroad and the Global Women's Caucus, because we were one of those 200 or so, 300, I don't know, joining Wendy's suit in the Massachusetts federal court in Boston. So,
and thank you for that, Sally. Thank you.
And all right, if there are questions, please, from anyone that's listening, please type them into the chat box. Marnie, if there are any questions on Facebook Live, please let us know. And while we're waiting for questions to come in, let me ask one. We have a list of questions here just in case. Is it going to matter if we take the presidency? What will change? Do you think that Biden and Harris will fire the archivist? Do you think that would be helpful? What do you think? I mean, what's your take? Any of you?
I want to answer this.
Go, Kamala.
I think that if Mr. Biden wins, that the legislative part, which is SJ Res 6, will go through. So there's legislation in Congress to lift this deadline, to remove this deadline. It passed in the House of Representatives this year. And then the Senate obviously is not doing anything, because until we get rid of all of those people, nothing is going to happen. So we've got to get rid of them. However, even if they remove the deadline and they write it in and all of this, there are going to be people that say, how do you remove a deadline that expired 40 years ago? And they're going to start suing. Because if I can remove a deadline that expired in 1982, why don't we just go ahead and remove some other ones that we maybe don't like anymore? This is just me. I'm a layperson, so I'm all about it now. And here's what I think. I think that if we get the awareness up, if we get enough women to be knowledgeable that this is on the line, I do not think the court can rule against us. If, however, they can slip under the radar and give us a bad decision, it will actually affect later, after Mr. Biden does all the good stuff. When it does end up in the courts later, the fact that we have lost this will be very, very poor. So I just think that there's a proper order of focus. And right now, in the next 2 weeks, we must focus on the fact that Wendy's lost is something's going to happen with it, one way or another. And absolutely removing these senators that are standing in the way of these votes is you know, that goes without saying. But I do need to say that this other thing that's happening on the side is going to have ramifications down the line if we don't focus on it right now. Am I right, Wendy?
Yeah, I'm so glad. I just want to say a couple things. One is, no matter what Biden does, the issue will end up in the courts. Biden has not promised in his women's agenda, which he released 2 weeks ago, he did not promise to direct the archivist to publish the ERA, which he could have done. He did not do.
That's why I'm asking him. Yeah.
And it's an Obama appointee archivist. My personal opinion is that the archivist personally wants to publish, but he's been directed by the Department of Justice under the Trump administration not to publish it. I don't think Biden is going to change that opinion, only because he didn't say so in his women's agenda. He could have said, where he has a little bit written up about the ERA, he could have said, as soon as I'm in office, I'm going to make the damn archivist publish the ERA. Because even if there's a challenge to the ERA once published, it's at least valid during that interim period. You know, and I think that would give us an enormous amount of potential to keep it valid, right? Once it's in, it's harder to take rights away once they're there. But our opponents are already ready to sue. And I know there's been a question about this congressional effort to retroactively remove the 1982 deadline. Yeah. You know, there are scholars who would argue that Congress can do whatever it wants, and that's fine. More scholars say Congress doesn't have the power to retroactively remove a deadline. And I say that I agree with that view, even though I wish I didn't, because at the time the ERA deadline was being extended in 1978, when it was being extended to 82, there was testimony in Congress at that time. And the scholars that testified said, if we don't extend it now, there's nothing we can do because we have no power. Congress will have no power after it expires in 1979. So we've got a lot against us on the likely constitutionality of the effort to remove the deadline retroactively. In my view, it doesn't really matter because you're going to have to win in the courts anyway, and that's a political question. It's not a legal question. If we win in the courts, it will be for political reasons because we, in large numbers, went united to DC or someplace, in a significant way and made clear that we will not tolerate a decision against us. That's the only way we will win in the courts.
Angela,
I have a question.
And then
Yeah.
Christina. I'll read Christina's when Angela is.
Okay, I have a question. You guys spoke about we have to have unity among women. That's kind of difficult for any number of reasons. Do you have any materials, other than this video, which we can chop up and make into something, that we can promote, but it'd be great if there was some kind of infographic or something that said, here's all the rights that you don't actually have, that you think you do.
Yeah.
Yes, we have plenty of those.
Yeah, okay, all right. Well, please.
But Angela, you're so right, because what you're saying is what could unite us? We've obviously got very different feelings about different things, right? And we're different. We're not.
Violence unites women. Violence against women
crosses
every single boundary.
Yep.
Every race of money, anything. As I said, 4.2 women dying every single day. Nothing is being done about it. And I think that, violence against women and the fact that Mr. Biden himself wrote VAWA, and we see how having a law that has to constantly go back and see if people want to give it money is not the way to go, because it just gives people opportunities to make loopholes and all of this. But Angela, one thing I do want to say about the unity thing really fast is because as women of color, we have a very steep hill to climb with ERA. I've been facing it since I started, where women of color do not feel like they were ever invited to this party. They do not feel like anybody's speaking to them. They do not feel like they're being engaged. As you saw what's going on with NOW and all this going on, and I've experienced this too, there's a marginalization of women of color within the women's movement itself. And so it makes things quite difficult to tell, because it's going to help the women of color more than anybody else. That's the thing. And so, getting to find a way to communicate that has been extremely, extremely difficult. And that's why I think we need more surrogates of color that are educated themselves. Like the sororities, the Deltas are great. The Deltas were instrumental in the victory in Virginia because they gave us entree. Because if a Delta was there, then people trusted us. You know what I mean?
But I want to say one more thing, though. Kamala's pointing out something very important, which is that there's always been a lot of race-sex tension in our movement. And I think we are not being sophisticated enough about the fact that it is being imposed upon us by external forces, by the patriarchy. They are wanting us to feel divided, to feel different, to fight each other. It's always been difficult for us to transcend that, but we can if we copy the strategy of groups like Black Lives Matter. When somebody looks at Black Lives Matter and they're very focused on race, and nobody says, well, wait a minute, what about the fact that some of you are female, some of you are gay, some of you are trans, some of you are Jewish? Nobody says that. They say it's okay to be focused on the singular issue of race because it's a singularly important issue. We need to adopt that mindset and say, yes, we are different, but don't tell us to divide amongst each other. Don't try to separate us. Let us bond as females because we suffer as females. It's binary, but not because we are binary and discriminatory toward one another and disrespectful. It's binary because that is the force against us. It is a binary force against us. So we should bond and not let others tell us that we ought to divide. We've never been good at this. We have to
Divide and
Yes.
conquer.
Yes, that is true. We have to stay together. So I implore all women of all races and ages and incomes, do not support. You have to support this because your rights are in danger. Everybody thinks that we're all set. A lot of people do. I'm always surprised. My husband even thought before we saw the film, Equal Means Equal, he thought that women had equal rights. And in a certain way, I live in Germany and I do have equal rights to a man here. If I leave here and go to my home in America, then I'm not even a full citizen, really. So please support equal rights. It won't hurt you. There's a lot of people, everybody was in 100 years ago, 150 years ago, people were afraid that, it's going to mean that women are going to do this, or you're not going to get any child support, or you're not going to have this, or you're not going to have that.
Or you'll get abortions.
Yes,
right?
or you'll get abortions, or
Yeah, the red
whatever
herring
it
is the whole
is.
argument.
Women will be bossing you around. Women are bossing you around now, so just let it go. I don't mean to be flip, but it's true. Next question. We
From
have
Christina. I'll read it out because she sent it privately. Christina lives in Norway, where, like most European and African countries, women do have equal rights in all of the legislation and in the Constitution. And she writes and she says that Norway has the same stats for domestic violence as every other country. And the law already states that violence against a person is a crime in Norway. So her question is, will passing the ERA create a better situation for women when it comes to domestic violence? That's Christina's question from Norway. So who wants to take that?
I can take that very quickly. The answer is, I understand her point, which is that she doesn't have the structured inequality that we have, and they still have high numbers. I don't doubt that, but the cause of their problem may be different than ours. There's a lot of research, and I cite this in my brief in our case, a lot of research that proves not just a correlation, but that proves the causation of structured inequality with high rates of violence against the underclass. That goes without saying. So give us equality, we're going to get better. We may not get perfect, but we're going to get better. And here's a really important example of a very black and white law that overtly discriminates against women and pertains to the class-based violence that we care so much about, but that doesn't seem to have much heft when we talk about how to deal with the problem as a class-based issue. We don't think about women being a class. In Massachusetts and in more than half the states, we have laws against hate crimes. This may not exist in Norway. Laws against hate crimes provide for more punishment if the offender targets you because of who you are, because of your status as a gay person or a Black person or woman. Massachusetts and about more than half the states explicitly exclude sex or gender as a category intentionally. Every other category is there in Massachusetts: race, religion, national origin, sexual orientation, transgender, disability. They're all there. The only category that's not there is sex or gender. So what is the message then to people in society? You can hurt women and not get in as much trouble. Obviously, if the ERA were in place, that law would be illegal. Without the ERA in place, that law is legal. That's a very simple example of why violence against women will become a less serious problem with ERA in place. We also then, with ERA in place, have the power to sue the government for inadequate protections. If the government systematically refuses to prosecute violence against women, which it does right now, the vast majority of rapes and domestic violence cases are never prosecuted. Why? Because women aren't worth very much. You create equality in the Constitution, we can actually sue the government for discriminating against women by denying them access to justice. We can't sue right now because the laws that protect us don't give us the authority or the ability to sue the government. We would never win. with the ERA in place, we would win. And we wouldn't even have to sue because the government would change its policies overnight to avoid the expensive lawsuit. That's one of the important powers that comes from the ERA.
I think that answers the question. It's a complex question in the sense that those of us who are in Europe are living in societies that are quite different from what's going on in the United States, and the legal systems are totally different. So I think it's a hard question to respond to, but it seems to me that the legal basis for equality of women being in the Constitution is the very foundation of fighting all the other discriminatory laws that are on the books.
Yep, absolutely.
But I will, Angela, did you have any other questions that you wanted?
Well, I did have a question. You mentioned earlier that there is no organization fighting for the ERA like the ACLU. Has anybody ever thought about starting one?
Well, we're
Like
kind
a
of
woman's
doing it
legal?
because we've been filing these impact lawsuits with Wendy. We started with Betsy DeVos when she tried to take the Dear Colleague letter and throw that out. Now we had to sue her again because now she just threw the whole thing out. She's like, yeah, go ahead, rape away. No worries. No problem.
That was outrageous.
Outrageous. So, and there's another one coming up where, what is this men's, there's a men's group that's suing to ensure that if there's a draft, it can only be for men. And so I think we're going to jump in there and say no. If there's a draft, which there should never be, because there should be no wars, which will be when there are more women involved, there'll be less war. But anyway, if there ever were a draft, everybody would have to be drafted. That's absurd.
Clearly, clearly.
I'll jump in here because Congress actually voted to draft women back in the 1960s. It was vetoed by the president at the time, but it did go through. So the next time there is a draft, women will be drafted. I also wanted to mention that one of the, which is something we haven't spoken about yet, is that one of the reasons why our lawsuit is so powerful is because the deadline that was put into the ERA was included in the preamble, not in the actual text of the amendment, like other amendments that have had deadlines successfully put on them.
Exactly. It's a fine legal point that people love to talk about. Wendy, top of the list, but our greatest jurist on the Supreme Court, Ruth Ginsburg, has issues with it as well. So she's in favor of a legislative solution. So I think we need to be a big tent of women. And
well, she said we should start over, which
she did. Well, she did, but it's hard to I mean, we've all read, I guess, why she said that, but it's difficult to go that route for
well, I think also she was asked in the context of there are problems with the ERA. Yes, there are problems with the ERA. Don't we wish that there was no deadline on the ERA? Sure, we do. But if the last constitutional amendment took 202 years to be added, do we really have another 202 years? The answer is no.
We have, if they do that to us, we have to do women's strike, nationwide women's strike. This has to get a lot more in their face, but that's why I don't want it to get to that. It doesn't have to get to that. Look, 190 companies, big, huge companies, Apple, Google, Twitter, Airbnb, they all signed in support of ERA. That means that it's mainstream enough that right now, if we could figure out how to just use that and the tenor of the times to just make that deadline go away, make this, whatever it is, happen, we should go that way. Because I'll tell you something, I'm not starting again. That is not happening.
Nobody wants to start again.
No, but I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. And none of these women are going to put up with it. You can't kill us, beat us, and rip us off and tell us to wait another 100 years. It's not happening. Whatever way we got to do it, it's got to be done. So we got to stop being so polite. I've been having this fight for 5 years. Come on, guys. People are dying.
The only way Cam wins, the only way Cam's idea wins, is if we mobilize, unite, and rise up, and it has to be more threatening than we've ever been. It's not complicated. Look at how unions have functioned. Look at how Black Lives Matter has functioned. Look how social groups have functioned when they have made a difference. They are not like women. They do not go politely and ask for a seat. They rise up. They become threatening. Even getting suffrage done, 2 important things got women the right to vote in this country. It wasn't women being polite. It was women being very, very, very aggressive. Hunger strikes, protests at the White House, threatened violence in many respects.
Let's go.
Yeah. And
Let's go.
And then the second thing that women did, which we have never talked about, but it probably needs to be talked about, is they created their own party. They created the Women's Party and used that as leverage. And it was a brilliant move to become its own party. Women were basically saying, none of you deserve our votes. Until you do right by us on suffrage, none of you deserve our votes. We need to do that with ERA. We need to say to both sides, and the Democrats are obviously much more favorable, there's no question, but we're being too polite, even with the Democrats sometimes. And I think making a woman, even if it's a super PAC, maybe not a party, it's hard to make a party, but even a super PAC, the power and the unity to be able to say, you want our votes? This is the only thing. Equality first, everything else second. That should be our
question. That you just made me think of, Wendy, so thank you for that. Equal means equal. In the lawsuits, the pleadings that I've read in the Massachusetts case, there was some mention of what kind of association equal means equal is, and does it have members?
So
here's my question to you. Can we join equal means equal as a member and raise money that way? Is that because that
would be wonderful. We are on fumes. We just had a very frightening phone call because thank God, we're all volunteers. None of us get paid, but we do have people like we have an assistant that lives in India and she has a little baby and she gets minimum wage, and we have a man in Washington that helps us with our press releases, and he also is an independent, and so we are in desperate need of help and funding. And so we have we have a C3 and a C4. So we can take donations as educational grants or gifts or whatever. And then we can allocate those funds to the C4, and we can also get funds directly to the C4. But the C4, you don't get a tax. You can't.
Camilla, I understand what you're saying. Wendy knows what you're saying. I don't know if anyone else knows what you're talking about. Okay, so
well, basically,
those of you who are not lawyers.
Okay, right. There are 2 kinds of nonprofits in the world that I know of. One is a nonprofit called a C3, which if you give them money, then you can take that as a tax deduction at the end of the year because it's a charity donation. And that's education and advocacy and outreach and community service. That's what Heroica Foundation is for. And then equal means equal is the C4. We're the ones that will go to your state houses and plan your rallies and get you some buses to bring those people to the polls.
Okay.
If you want to give money to that organization, you will not get a tax break, but you are very welcome to give us money. And if you want a tax break, you have to give it to the foundation and then let us give it to the other one, because we can give it to the other one for projects, specific projects. Okay, we're going to do a project in North Carolina where we're going to get out the vote in these 5 districts, and we're going to have these, then we can give that money to the C4 and then it executes it.
So how would a PAC be better? How would a super PAC be better than?
There's no limit on how much money you can raise, because I don't know why, but with every other thing, there's some kind of limits of how much money you can give, I think.
to sum that up,
Yeah,
you can
Natalie.
become a thank you. To sum that up, you can become a member of Equal Means Equal by logging onto our website, equalmeansequal.org. You can sign up for our newsletter, and also you can donate to fuel the fight. Any amount you'd like, we'll take.
In the interim,
Yeah.
just because we're not supposed to be doing this, but since I brought it up, it's my fault. So I will take
Oh.
full responsibility. Please also
Oh, I'm
consider
so sorry.
donating to Democrats abroad, because we need the money to get out the vote,
Exactly.
to get rid of Mitch McConnell and the rest of those creeps, not to use a different word, in the Senate. Because if we don't take the Senate back, we can't ratify CEDAW, and we can't get rid of the deadline, and we can't do anything. So let's give the money to everybody we possibly can. But first, let's get rid of it.
Why don't we do an event for Constitution Day or around there, where we read we do a stage reading. We get some cool actors to do a staged reading of Wendy's brilliant argument to the court. We have the two lawyers and the judge, and we cast it with famous people. Well, I want to play Wendy Murphy, but anyway, we could get somebody else. And then we charge like, $5 or $10 or whatever for people to watch the show, and then we can raise money.
Yay. Great idea. Great.
That sounds like a great idea.
Yeah. I think
maybe
we're about to wrap up.
Yes, I have one more, Sally. I just want to ask. I know that it's possible, it's probable that there won't be a women's march next year. But if there is, the subject should be the Equal Rights Amendment.
Can
We
I
said that from the
beginning?
beginning.
Them from the beginning. There's something I'm telling you, something in the milk ain't white. Something is going on. We don't know what it is because we're not on the inside. But I went to those before we even knew what it was going to be. I was lobbying so hard because I said what I was worried was going to happen. Oh, women are hysterical. One's talking about this, one's talking about that. They didn't understand. ERA is the umbrella under which all of these things fall. You don't look hysterical then, but instead they wouldn't do it. And every year they wouldn't do it until the Virginia Women's March had a whole focus on ERA. Right. But we do not know why that is. And in a way, it could be because up until we flipped the Virginia legislature, they didn't think we were going to get the 3 states. So people were kind of trying to squish down our 3-state strategy. They weren't into it. The establishment women's movement was not about the 3-state. They kept trying to tell us to stop that because Congresswoman Maloney wants to start over. She wants to start over. And so we want to.
There's
We're not starting over.
Angela, in terms of the Women's March, before the first march, I was in some contact with folks who were in leadership, and it was very clear that they prohibited. It was made clear to me that ERA was prohibited as a topic. It wasn't just that they didn't know; they forbade it as a topic. And Gloria Steinem, who many people think of as an important feminist voice, she hasn't been a particularly strong feminist voice for a long time. And when she wrote an op-ed that was widely published in support of the first Women's March, she didn't mention ERA at all. She mentioned a lot of other things that women care about, immigrant rights and all sorts of things that matter. But when you have a women's march and you don't put women's structured inequality at the top of the list as your primary, if not only issue, then you are co-opting women, you are distracting them, and you're part of the problem. Me, I'd be a single issue voter. I'm a single issue marcher. If I'm going to have an event about women, I'm going to make it only about the ERA. It doesn't mean that women don't care about other things, but our voices will be louder if we become equal. All the things we care about get half of our voices because we don't have equal status under the law. When we become equal, everything we care about rises with us. That's the theme we need. That's why I think we need a super PAC. And I don't care who gives money to whom. My opinion is we need a super PAC or a party that's called the Women's Women's Equality Super PAC or the Women's Equality Party, so that everybody understands this is a one-issue party. Equality
Right.
first, everything else second. And when we win equality, we will cancel our super PAC or cancel our party. That's how laser focused we need to be.
I
think you're
100% agree. Yes.
Yeah, the problem
A
is
super PAC,
so many
not a party.
parties, nobody has prioritized the ERA
That's right.
as a
That's
tool
right.
to fix them all. And so everyone's got, it's not, I mean, I'm not criticizing this, but we all have our priorities. I mean, there's violence, there's poverty. I mean, we have all these issues and we need to prioritize the ERA as the one tool that is going to go a long way to solving some of these awful situations that all women find themselves in. And
Right.
I agree, Wendy, so much.
Think of all of these things as ships, right? Immigrant rights are a ship. Gun violence is a ship. Violence against women is a ship. And the ERA is the tide that will bring them all up together. And, when the tide rises, all of the ships will rise with it.
We should work together to get that message out, for sure. Anybody else? A question or a comment, because we're going to have to, unfortunately, draw this conversation to a close. I hope it would be one in many going forward. And I hope that we can follow up with the great ideas that were raised on the call today and in the chat box. In particular, let's get Wendy's oral arguments into the theaters and in the street. Yay.
Yes.
I love it.
Yes, for sure.
Any questions from anyone? Otherwise, I think we're going to have to say, oh, now's the time. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Sally.
Thank
And
you.
Angela.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you
I hope
guys
to
for
see you all
coming. This
again
has been great.
soon.
Thank you all.
And if
Thank
they ever
you.
let you out of the bound borders of the United States, please come and visit us.
We're
Yeah.
in Gilead. Save us.
Yeah, that is true. It's pretty frightening.
Register
It's
to
so
vote and
scary.
vote the maniac out of office. It's only a while away. So maybe we can all celebrate
Yes.
the new year on a better foot with a great PACs and a real wide, great unity to go forward. Thank you, everyone.
Yes.
Don't
Mhm.
forget, we're
Good night,
around.
everyone.
Keep questions
Thanks.
going.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. I'm ending the call now.
Have a great evening, rest of the day,
Thanks.
morning, wherever you are. Bye-bye.